Welcome to City Services Monthly. I'm your host, Donnie Turlington. This month, I'm pleased to be joined by Kevin Baker, who's the Executive Director of the Piedmont Triad International Airport. Kevin, thanks for taking the time to come out and spend some time with us.
Well, thanks for having me, Donnie. Appreciate it.
Talk about your role as Executive Director of the airport. A lot of our residents may not quite understand everything that goes into the work that you do every day.
Well, I sometimes define it as chief cook and bottle washer, but it's really the same as the rest of our staff. We have a mission that is focused on 2 points, and that's the passenger's experience, making sure that our passengers have the best experience of any airport that they go through, and then economic development, making sure that our airport is ready for that next big economic development project and supporting those employers that we have right now. And every single minute of my day is focused on one of those 2 aspects of the airport, as I said, with the same with the rest of our staff. But that entails anything from meeting with FAA or perhaps elected officials, or trying to find funding for big projects, meeting with airlines, negotiating a contract with a customer who might be on a tenant who might be on the airport, just all sorts of things. It's a small city, really, in and of itself.
Sure. Well, and you have roughly 1 million passengers a year that go through the doors over there and onto the planes. And I think most residents who have spent some time at the airport over the last 18 to 24 months have seen a lot of changes. Talk about some of those changes.
Yeah, really there's a total of about 1.7 million passengers total, if you include those that are coming and those that are leaving. This passenger experience to us is very important. We can't be Raleigh, we can't be Charlotte. And we get that, and we're not going to try to become one of those 2 airports. But for those who do use our airport, and will continue to use our airport, we want it to be the best experience that it can be. And about 3 or 4 years ago, we set out with a list of what things that we could improve that would improve that passenger experience. Developed a big list, put costs to it, and then prioritized all of those things, and then started doing them, basically. And I always tell folks it's sort of like the young couple that buys a house and wants to do all this remodeling. They want to put a new bathroom in, they want to add a garage, they want to put a swimming pool in, whatever else it might be. And you can't afford to do it all at once.
Right.
In an airport of our size, we don't have the kind of budget to go and do all of that at once. So we're chipping away one piece at a time at it. And we've really, over now about 4 years, accomplished quite a lot of things. The latest and greatest probably is the ceiling project, which basically takes down an old lay-in ceiling that was hiding 9 feet of clear vertical space above it and opens that up into a much more modern feel. You can see the actual superstructure of the building. We've included the architects call them clouds, but they're arches that are up inside the steel just to soften the look of the steel. Lighting, very soft lighting. Again, really just to make it feel much more modern. It's renewing the place. It's a 30-year-old building. It was time. It needed to be renewed. I think that it's been said by some of the colleagues and my colleagues in this industry that we control a very negative piece of a person's time.
Sure.
Because nobody wants to be in an airport. You think about it, you want to get in and get on your plane and get out of there. You don't want to be sitting in the airport. And when you come back into town, you want to get into your car and get out of there as quickly as you can with your baggage there and all that kind of stuff. So when you're controlling, what can be a negative experience, you try to do everything you can to turn that around and make it a positive.
Yeah. And that's part of how you were trying to create that competitive advantage. I'm glad you mentioned, you're not trying to be Raleigh, you're not trying to be Charlotte, but PTI is unique because we have customers and residents and passengers for you all who have 3 choices really of the different airlines or the different airports that they can fly out of. How is that? Is PTI unique in that sense across the country? I mean, there can't be very many situations like this. And what are you guys doing in addition to what you've already talked about to kind of separate yourselves and to create that opportunity to encourage people to come to PTI to fly?
Yeah, we are fairly unique. There are other cities that have situations like this. One that I can quote, the Lehigh Valley Airport in eastern Pennsylvania. I know this well because I went to school over there. It is about an hour and a half away from Newark Airport and about 45 minutes or so from Philly Airport. So they kind of face the same problem that we do, or benefit. My chairman, Steve Shofady, very often says the fact that we have the ability for folks in this area to use any one of 3 airports is actually a benefit to the community. if you think about it, because there are choices. Now, obviously, to our airport, it's a negative if we're losing passengers. There's a term of art in the industry that's called leakage, and basically that's defined as a person who should geographically fly out of one airport, but for some other reason chooses to fly out of a different one.
Right.
Usually either cost or frequency or direct flights as opposed to connecting flights. Some folks just don't like to connect. And that is what it is. I live with the airline world. We have to live with the sort of control what you can control and don't worry about those things that you can't control. The old serenity prayer, we have to live with that all the time because of the fact that we can't control what airlines are going to fly here, what they're going to charge, how they're going to treat their customers. Really, no part of that whole airline experience, the flying piece of it, can we control. But what we can control is that piece while they're in the building, and while they're parking, and while they're trying to use Wi-Fi in the building. We've got a great, very high-speed Wi-Fi system, free. The signage coming into and out of the buildings, those kind of things. And those are the things that we can make easier. And you see the campaign that we have out there right now, Fly Easy. It's just so much easier to fly from this facility than it is to fly from one, that's 80 or 90 miles away with a much larger market where you have more traffic, a lot harder to park, more expensive parking. So, the folks who fly out of this area do have those choices. We recognize that there's really nothing we can do about the fares, and we can't do anything about the fact that you have to connect in most markets when you fly from here. It's true of every airport of this size in the country, and a lot that are even bigger. My hometown, Pittsburgh, has services not a whole lot better than what we have. And I've been here 17 or 18 years now, and the service there has dropped precipitously. Here it has dropped somewhat, but not nearly like it has there, or places like Cincinnati, Cleveland, a couple other cities that you could name pretty quickly. What's happened, Donnie, I guess, in the industry over the last few years is that there's been a lot of consolidation. Where you used to have a whole bunch of airlines, you're now down to just a few. And that obviously creates sort of small monopolies that each one of these airlines has geographically, and that affects markets like us pretty badly.
Kevin, you mentioned 1.7 million passengers coming through the doors in some way, shape, or form at PTI. Talk about what you're starting to see, or maybe some trends that you've noticed. Are we starting to get back to pre-recession levels? Maybe are we seeing that climb? I think you guys are unique, and maybe a unique indicator from an economic standpoint of where we are as a nation in recovery from the recession. You look at gas prices, and as gas prices go down, the theory is more people get in their cars and travel in the summertime and that sort of thing. But what are you guys seeing in terms of return customers?
Well, I think for the most part, our traffic is pretty flat, and it has been flat for some time now. We certainly had a bit of a return from the recession, but then it flattened out. And really that's, again, tied back to the airline industry, and the fact that the consolidation has limited the number of flights that we're going to have. Basically, the deal is that the airline industry now there's two things. Number one is that they are living by what they call capacity constraint. That means they're basically keeping airplanes parked in the desert. And by doing so, they reduce the number of seats that are in the market. The number of seats is what drives the price. It's just supply and demand, straight supply and demand. And as long as they can keep the seats fewer, then they can keep the prices higher. And that's why, folks tell me all the time, hear all the woes from the airline industry, but every time I fly, the airplane's full, right? And they are. They're very full. And the airlines are doing that on purpose so that they can maintain some level of profitability. Now, of course, with gasoline, at lower prices like it is now, the airlines are doing even better. But because of that, they can keep those prices where they are, and unfortunately that impacts us. The other piece with the consolidation is that the airlines' mantra these days is to fly to hubs. They're going to serve their hubs, period. And what that means is that markets like us, or even some larger markets, if it's not a hub, to get service from that location to another location that is not a hub, you're going to have to fly through a hub.
Right.
All right, so you're not going to go from here to Sacramento, California without connecting in some city.
Right, right.
You're not even going to go from here to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania anymore without connecting in some other city. It's also true for Greenville, Spartanburg, for Richmond. You know, you can name a whole bunch of cities that are in the same boat. But because of that, when you have mergers, the typical thing that happens after a merger is you've got to find some efficiency in the merger, or there's no reason to do it,
Yeah.
right? You want to eliminate costs. So what the airlines do to eliminate costs typically is to eliminate hubs. So, you know, you could look at an example of Delta and Northwest. Before the two of those merged, there were hubs in Atlanta, in Cincinnati, in Memphis, Detroit, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, not Milwaukee. And now 2 of those 5 are gone. We used to have direct service to those cities, and now we don't anymore.
Yeah.
So that's really what's hurting the traffic here, and the ability of our folks to get at least on one flight to some other location.
Right, right.
And again, there's really nothing that we can do. You can't force
Sure.
the airlines to do that.
Sure. Going back to what you talked about, though, in terms of making the experience while people are in the airport as enjoyable as possible, one of the interesting things that you all are doing, and I think the most visible things that you all are doing, is some of the advertising that's going on over inside the airport. I hear people all the time talk about the High Point University stuff that they see in there and that sort of thing. But also, kind of a neat thing is some of the public art that's going on out there, and that's a direct extension, I think, from the city of Greensboro, which is so supportive of public art. So talk a little bit about those things.
It is, and in fact, it's actually a triad-wide effort. It's not just City of Greensboro, it's all 3 cities, both counties, and even beyond that. We had a large group of folks that was assembled to be our sort of art committee. Mm-hmm. And yeah, this was just another outgrowth. This was just another piece of that puzzle to improve the experience, you know, and we reached out to the art community and asked them to consider what we could do in the airport. Worked with a consultant who put together a program that would sort of be a master plan for how art could develop around the airport, where we could put various pieces, et cetera, what type of pieces we might use, and how we would incorporate art into new construction as it came along. And this committee worked together over the course of probably 18 months or so to come up with that master plan and to really get it ready to execute. And then we started executing it, and it's really amazing. We've got some really neat stuff out there, and are going to have some even neater things as we go forward. And I think it's really we've actually got a little handbook that passengers can stop by and pick one up, and you can do a self-guided tour and look at the pieces that are in the airport. And I think it's really been a positive benefit to our passengers.
Well, again, it's eye-opening to me. I just recently flew out of PTI. It's a great experience from my standpoint, and I hear lots of positive feedback, I think, and it's one of those things where I think you guys are in the conversation as people start looking at, you know, what are we doing to change in order to encourage economic development and growth, and PTI is definitely a part of that conversation. We're going to take a short break, but when we come back, I want to talk to you more about the economic development side of the equation for you guys.
Okay.
Stay tuned. We'll be back with Kevin Baker here in just a minute. Welcome back to City Services Monthly. We're here with Kevin Baker, Executive Director of the Piedmont Triad International Airport. Kevin, one of the things I think that I recall brought you to Greensboro originally was economic development and some of the work related to bringing FedEx to PTI. Talk about that effort.
Yeah, it's funny. I used to make the claim that I was the first economic impact of the FedEx project because literally the airport was selected April 13th of 1998, and I was here on April 14th, 1998, working with Ted Johnson, my predecessor, and staff members. Yeah, I mean, that was, my background is civil engineering. I worked for a company for 20 years that designed and built airports, basically, or managed the construction of airports. And, you know, I had that skill set, obviously, and this airport is you know, growing in that way, and it was a very unique opportunity, I think, just because of matching skill sets with opportunity at the facility.
Right. So with FedEx, after FedEx comes Honda, and then now we have HAECO there. It's really created that aerospace hub in some way, shape, or form. But part of that, I think, has been by design and by plan from a strategic sense. But when people may hear aerospace all the time, but talk about what that really means from an economic development standpoint.
Well, sure, and actually it's backwards from that.
Okay.
HAECO, Timco was here first.
Correct, you're right.
Back
yeah.
in 1990, I believe it was, and also Cessna. Folks aren't so aware of the fact that Cessna operates a very significant MRO in its system,
Sure.
maintenance, repair, and overhaul, that stands for.
And actually, if you're taking off from one of the runways out there, you'll see Honda and HAECO and Cessna as you're kind of leaving
That's
the
correct.
airspace.
All right in a line.
Yeah.
And yeah, all of those folks, you know, so HAECO, Cessna, FedEx, Honda, even our FBO, fixed base operator, which is Landmark Aviation, all of these companies are part of this aerospace business, and there are just not so many cities in the United States that have the bench strength in that aerospace industry that this community does, the broad community of the Triad. You can't go to just any city and find 3,000 or 4,000 employees in the aerospace business. You've got 1,400 at last count, I think, at Honda. Timco's around 1,500. HAECO, excuse me, is around 1,500. Cessna's, I think, around 150, something like that. You know, so just those companies alone are over 3,000 folks. And you know, the aerospace industry is very kind of esoteric. You know, it requires specialized training, either at the engineering level or even at the maintenance level. We've got an amazing crown jewel, I would say, of GTCC, having a campus right on the airport. Without them, the employees wouldn't be there to fill the jobs that are opening up on the other side of the airport. All of these companies will tell you that the most important thing for them when they're looking at the community is whether the workforce is going to be there.
Sure.
Other things are important, sites and incentives and all that kind of stuff is certainly part of the puzzle, but if they don't have the workforce, they're not going to even consider the location. So again, back to my first point, we have that bench strength, we have that workforce, and I would say that we're one of probably 20 plus or minus cities in the U.S. that has that kind of strength and that kind of depth in the airframe and power plant mechanics standpoint, aerospace designers, logistics with FedEx. So we've got a whole bunch of pieces of a really cool puzzle.
Yeah. And what a lot of our viewers may have seen over the last year or two as well is discussion about a bridge over 73 and the boulevard out there that opens up, another 600 potential acres for development.
Yeah, you know, one of the things that used to keep me awake at night, and even Ted, before he retired, I think he would tell you the same thing, was that after Honda, the first phase of Honda was constructed, we realized that in the decade between 2000 and 2010, something like 85% of the airport property that was available for that kind of development had been used up by either FedEx or expansion of Cessna, expansion of Timco at that time,
right.
Honda, and then Honda has expanded even since then. And what would keep me awake after I got into this role was, what if some company came along, needed a 100-acre site, needed to be on an airport, needed to be next to a highway, all those features that we have, but we couldn't say yes. We didn't have that site available. Then you lose that project that, like a Honda or like a Timco that becomes a HAECO, that employs all these people.
Yeah.
And that would be a terrible, terrible thing to see that happen. And I always look back in retrospect and think, what if Honda wasn't here right now? What if HAECO wasn't here right now? Think of the impact of the community. So our goal was always to be ready to say yes. That's the way we look at it. We always want to be ready to say yes whenever a company comes in, whether they need 5 acres or 500 acres. So in 2011-ish, we set out to make sure that we were always going to be ready to say yes. And what we did was put together a plan that anticipated what could happen, what demand might occur, whether it would be expansion from our existing tenants, whether it might be a new tenant that we didn't even know about. Back in those days, believe it or not, sitting in a room with a bunch of folks, just kind of brainstorming, somebody said, hey, Boeing might come here one day and want 500 acres. And so that was another thing we had
Right.
to be planning for. And we're not really, our main role in terms of attracting economic development and companies like this is not so much to be selling it, although we do a lot of that
Right.
as well. But our main reason, or the main thing that we can do in that vein, I guess, is to make sure that the product is available, so that folks who are in the economic development sales community, whether it be GEDA or the Piedmont Tribe Partnership or the Department of Commerce or the new private partnership for the state, they're out there selling. We have products for them to sell now. And the bridge, this is a long explanation for your bridge question, but it all does tie together. On the other side of where that bridge is, we already owned, back in 2011, 450 acres. Now we own a little bit more than that. But we couldn't get access to it.
Yeah.
And they were about to build 73 through there, the DOT was. And we said, look, this is going to cut off our access permanently from that property. We need to be able to get a bridge over top of that road to be able to access all of that land and be able to continue growing in the future. And you asked me earlier what I do.
Right.
On a day-to-day basis. I spend an awful lot of time in Raleigh and in DC,
Sure.
Trying to sell this idea with a whole bunch of other people, and there were so many people involved in it, but a lot of folks really took that idea under their belts and led to make it happen.
Sure.
And thank God we do, because now that thing's under construction. And now I can sleep at night, because if a company comes in tomorrow and says we need 200 acres, well, that bridge is going to be done in approximately the same time as it would take a company like that to build a site.
Right.
So we've gotten all of that underway. Another thing that just finished up a few weeks ago, and you might be reading about it right now, is that we actually went and did a NEPA document, National Environmental Policy Act, an environmental assessment, EA, it's sometimes referred to, for all of that property, which is kind of different timing from the way these things usually go, because usually you have to have a defined project first, and then you go through EA. We worked with the FAA and we explained to them that, that it was really putting us at a disadvantage to have to wait, because if you had to put 2 years of environmental work in front of a project, that might kill your ability to get the project.
Right.
So we worked with the FAA and we came up with a plan where we could do a sort of a master plan EA, and then go back to them for a supplement whenever a specific project comes along. And that supplemental process is much shorter. It's 60, 90 days as opposed to 2 years. So it takes a lot of the environmental process off of the critical path of the projects, and again, enables us to say yes.
Right.
Back to that same
Right.
point.
Kevin, my last question for you is, let's fast forward, if we can, a year or 2 or 3 down the road, and the bridge is complete, and that space is now available. What's the vision? What piece is missing? What's the pie in the sky business that we want to lure? What's your plan and your vision over the next few years?
Well, I'd say that my vision over the next few years is for those few years to be the very beginning of the next 100 years.
Sure.
We're looking really long term. We've got a master plan that looked out 50 years. We see just continued growth. We're working on all this 1,000 acres that's going to get opened up with the bridge, and looking for tenants that could occupy that, but we're already working on what happens after that. That's, again, my new concern is like a Boeing.
Right.
You have a Boeing come in there, and they wanted 430 acres. That would have eaten up almost half of this, just like that.
Right.
And then we'd be scrambling again. So we're trying to stay out in front of that and not have to get into the mad scramble. But I think in the very short term, I'm hopeful that we're going to see some very significant employer who either wants to expand on our airport or who wants to come to our airport as a new tenant, and just further develop the aerospace community on the airport, and just continue to grow this skill set and get it moving, like a snowball downhill.
Sure. Well, Kevin, thanks again for your time and for joining us on the show. Keep up the great work over at PTI.
Well, thanks very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks. That's all the time we have for this month's edition of City Services Monthly, but thanks for tuning in to Greensboro Television Network. We'll see you next month.